Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Tracy Cook, and I'm the online media manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled The Trick to Keeping High-Level Requirements High Level. Today's featured speaker is Dan Tasker, author, consultant, and business analyst. Dan is the author of 2 books and numerous articles. He retired in 2019 after working in consulting in the IT industry for 48 years. This webinar will last approximately 60 minutes, including the question and answer session at the end. Please be sure to submit your questions in advance using the questions feature of the GoToWebinar software. And with that, hello, Dan, welcome.
Hi, Tracy. Welcome. Thank you for having me, and welcome to all the attendees, presumably in various time zones. I'm coming to you from New Zealand. I like to start my presentations with objectives of what we're trying to achieve. So this is a 3-webinar series. The objective for the overall series is better requirements for information system-based solutions. And in particular, today's webinar, I'm looking to achieve clear guidelines for what constitutes a high-level requirement, again, for an information system. The agenda for today will run about 45 minutes. We'll start with some introductory slides, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by information systems and why they're special in terms of requirements. Then we'll spend some time looking at some high-level requirement examples. I've got some to show you, and I've got a few wrap-up slides. So that's how we'll progress with the agenda. And having set an objective, next thing, being a business analyst, I want to have a feel for what the problems we're trying to achieve. So I see the problems with high-level requirements. Number one, a lack of guidelines as to what is and isn't high level. So we'll be talking about that. The BABAC, the IIBA BABAC, talks about 3 levels of requirements, what they call business requirements, stakeholder requirements, and solution level requirements. I wrote an article about that, published on the Modern Analyst, called What's in a BABAC Name? And I describe why I think these aren't as descriptive, correctly descriptive as they might be. They define business requirement as a goal or objective, and I agree that that's a nice high-level thing, but that an objective is not really a requirement. Stakeholder requirements, they're pretty much equivalent according to their definition of what I consider a high-level requirement. But they call those stakeholder requirements, and then the more detailed level they call solution requirements. So I'll be using the term I'll be using the term high-level requirement and detail requirements, and we understand objectives separately. And then there's this concept of requirement engineering. You hear that term, and what my understanding of it is it's not really dealing with information systems. When they say engineering, they're really engineering products. And when I say products, these aren't digital products, these are physical products. Someone's producing a car or a washing machine, and you do need requirements for that. But those requirements, a lot of them are physical, design related, not the same at all as information systems. So they can have many, many levels of requirements as they decompose their products into systems, subsystems, components, subcomponents, that sort of thing. So we won't be talking about that. We're sticking with information systems. The other problem I've experienced my whole career is lack of good examples. I've consulted in a lot of organizations, and I go in and I say, can you show me a good example of a requirement? And I can produce more similar to that, and not many forthcoming. This is my favorite example of a high-level requirement. I found this in a high-level requirements document. How are we doing here? Yes. It was signed off by users, and the requirement was each customer record must be assigned a unique identifier. So according to that organization, that project, this was a high-level requirement. we'll come back to this particular one at the end of the talk and revisit that. Okay, so some assumptions for the webinar. First of all, we're here because we're not doing pure agile development. If we were, I have a friend who's a pure agile person, and she says, we don't need requirements. We're pure agile. We have user stories and we refine them and away we go. So that's a lovely scenario if you have a genuine product owner, someone who has the budget, it's what they want that's going to be built, they're available to the team full time to tell them what they need, and the development team goes off and produces that and tests them. So presumably we don't have that. Also, we're not talking about just a change. An organization needs a couple more fields on a screen, or they might need one new report. We don't really need high-level requirements for that. Okay, there's typically a change management process, and BAs responsible for dealing with changes follow that process. The assumption we are making for this webinar series is that we have a project. So we've had a business case, they've had a few possible solutions to a business problem or business opportunity. They've chosen the solution from the options, that solution is going to involve an information system based solution. And they're going to launch a project. They'll typically have a project manager. They'll bring on board a BA, and away this project goes. So typically that project will follow either a traditional waterfall life cycle, which starts with high-level requirements, goes to detail requirements, then on to design, that sort of thing. Or more popular these days is what they sometimes call an agile waterfall hybrid. And what that means is your business users are really separate from the project. They have their requirements. They need to be documented. They need to be signed off. And then what happens is the actual delivery of those requirements is treated in the agile format. So the developers are organized into Scrum teams. The BA typically is given the role of pseudo product owner. And what that BA is doing is taking the requirements they've been giving and talking to the team, walking them through those refinements. But in both of these cases, we typically have both high-level and detailed business requirements before we break into the hybrid mode. Okay, we're still in the intro. I want to fess up what I won't be talking about, things that that are out of scope for the series. First of all, I won't get into requirements elicitation techniques. So how you get requirements from your users, lots of techniques. That's not the issue here. It's the content that we're looking at. We won't be talking about non-functional requirements. The modern name for that is quality of service. So a project will need those. We're staying more in the functional area. If the business activities need some process improvement, okay, that's out of scope of what we're talking about. That's really a separate exercise. You need to look at the existing processes. Presumably someone has got some talent for improving them. Once you've got the improved processes, that's what you want to base your requirements on for the new system. Here's a fun one, usability or user experience. Again, out of scope, because if user experience is critical to your project or usability, you'll want to bring separate resources in that are specialized in that and layer those on top of the requirements. So we'll have a requirement for a screen. Someone's going to spend some time and some project energy doing that. We're not going to talk about that. The requirement itself for the information system is separate from that. And lastly, stakeholder management. And we're going to talk about stakeholders in a couple of minutes, and managing that, again, is important on a project, but it's really not it's not requirements related in terms of the requirements content. Okay, so that's our introduction. Let's look at information systems, and we'll start with a definition, how I envision this. An information system is a set of software capabilities that provides value by allowing authorized users. What those users are doing is they're adding, they're referencing, they're maintaining data, and that data is related to specific business activities. So the idea is these are business activities and they're going to be supported by an information system. So the way we can visualize an information system for a project, we have a system context diagram. So using the UML use case context diagram format here. So we have a box representing the system. We have users on the outside of the system. In UML, we'd call these actors, but they're persons using the system or systems interacting with the system. And within the boundary, these are now the activities, the business activities that are in scope for the system that we're delivering with this project, an information system. Okay, the one piece you don't see in these UML diagrams is, my friend, the database management system. So this little icon here represents system managed data. So when we talked a minute ago about adding, referencing, and maintaining data, okay, an information system typically comes with a database management system, which these activities use to create new records, store them, that sort of thing. So again, talking about an information system, this is an integral part, but we'll be looking at requirements for the activities. Okay, so that takes us to high-level requirement trick number one. Looking at an information system, there are 5 fundamental capability types. Let's talk about those. So here's our system. Here's our database management system coming through. The first fundamental type is a user interface. So a user interface, what that capability gives us is that the system is able to provide real-time support to a person, a user, performing a business activity. So here's one of the business activities in scope. Users are actors out here. These are going to be people, and they may be referencing things for their activity. They may be creating new data. Anything they do interacting with the system in real time uses the fundamental capability of a user interface. We'll talk about that some more. Second fundamental capability, the system can produce a report. So what we mean by that is the system is able to produce what I call a snapshot of system managed data available to someone offline. So this actor may use the system online sometimes, may not have any access to the system, but there is a business need to get some information out of that system that they can hold in their hand if needs be. Okay, second capability type. Third fundamental capability type is the ability to import data. And this is so non-manual entry of data. This is either a system providing the data or potentially a tool. So a system, our system, is given access to machine-readable data that supports business activities. So for example, when I mention a tool here, we talk about bulk loading data using a spreadsheet. Okay, so we enter that data in a spreadsheet and then you upload it. You're actually importing that data, and Excel is the tool. So that is actually a data import. Pause for a drink of water. Okay, that's 3 of our 5. Data export. Okay, again, this is going to a system or a tool. You can export stuff into a spreadsheet format or create a file. So the system is able to produce, again, a snapshot, because once you do this, the data doesn't change that you've taken out of the system. The system managed data is to be accessed by another system or tool. So it's kind of like a report, only machine readable. That's our fourth fundamental capability. And the last one is a little tricky. I call this an automated function. Okay, what we mean by that is the system is actually able to perform a business activity using available data. So things are not coming in, things are not going out. For the automated function, the way to think of this is a batch job that runs every night. My favorite is a bank application, and it's the job of the system to pay interest on savings accounts. So midnight, they kick off this batch job. It's running within the system. It's calculating interest, creating transactions, storing them back in the system, and it's done. So that's an example of what we call an automated function. So these 5 functions are all an information system can do for us. It can't do anything else. Okay, I've been waiting to hear from people about a 6th function, something I've missed. And I put this out a few years ago and nobody's come back with a 6th one yet. So I have a fairly high confidence level. Okay, so that's information systems. That's what I wanted to give you as an intro to that. Let's talk about high-level requirement examples. So we said we're in a project, and when a project kicks off, we have a project charter and typically a starter scope for a project. All right, so the example we're going to talk about today is an example I made up. We call the TRIPS RU case study. So the organization is a travel agency. The problem they had was they're losing money because they're getting less bookings these days. And they did a business case and they found one of the reasons they weren't getting the cases is they didn't actually have a website that offered online self-service booking. So they had a couple other options, but they chose this one. So the project charter said we're going to deliver a web-based flight booking system. Okay, and the charter scope didn't have this nice diagram, but what it had was some scope bullet points. So it said customer self-service flight booking is in scope. And I'm drawing this diagram here as a BA. The project manager, whoever put the charter together, didn't do that, but I'm making visual notes for myself. Okay, the second bullet point, what's in scope, is that the flight details for bookings are going to come from something called a global distribution system. So this is a travel agent. They have booking agents. They understand manually booking things for clients, and they understand that to do that, this is where all the data comes from. This is actually how flight booking systems work. They don't talk directly to the airlines. A GDS is an aggregator. So going into the project, we know this is, we need to talk to this. The system needs to talk to that. And the third thing they know they need to do going into the project is we're going to be selling tickets. So the financial system for the travel agency needs to know about sales and that sort of thing. So these are the 3 items in scope as we kick off the project. And here's a context diagram representing that. One fuzzy business activity that says book flights. We know the user is going to be a self-service customer. We know there's going to be 2 systems that it's going to need to talk to. A couple of out-of-scope things worth mentioning. One, the travel agency is a full service. They book hotels and car rentals, but that's out of scope for this system. And settling with the airlines. Again, having booked them, the travel agent collected the money, they have to pass that along. We won't have that in scope because the travel agent already does that with the manual ones. Okay, so trick number, so that's the example we're working. Let's go on to trick number 2. All right, we want to do high-level requirements. We have a starter scope. We want to, the trick number 2 is we want to involve subject matter experts. So let's talk about that for a minute. the BABOK defines subject matter expert as an individual with in-depth knowledge of a topic relevant to the business need or the solution scope. This is exactly what we want. These are the people we want to talk to get our high-level requirements. Okay, the BABOK also talks about stakeholders in that same breath. They define that as a group or individual with a relationship to the change, the need, or the solution. Okay, well, this is broader. Let's look at what stakeholders include. The project sponsor, the one whose budget we're using. Okay, and the one who's usually due to sign it off. They're a stakeholder. Do we want to talk to them about project high-level requirements? They probably can't be bothered. What they tend to do is delegate. They say, we've got people that understand that. Okay, so they fall in the category of solution users. There's staff, that's a type of stakeholder. Some projects get customers involved. Some projects involve suppliers, and they talk to their suppliers to get requirements. And when these systems run in operations, they're operations staff that are stakeholders in the system that's running. So what I've done is highlighted in gold here. Amongst these stakeholders is where we're probably going to find some subject matter experts. There's one other category of stakeholder, and these are our delivery resources. There's the project manager. There's our stars, the business analysts. Don't tell anyone I said that. Architects, designers, developers, testers, star testers. Wouldn't be a project without them. I absolutely adore testers, so I don't have to do that. Didn't have to do that before I retired. There may be a subject matter expert amongst them, especially when we get into importing or exporting data. There may be somebody in the BA space that may be our subject matter expert. But what I'm saying is, trick number 2 is we don't want stakeholder requirements. We don't want a requirement that some stakeholder says they need. What we want is the subject matter experts to tell us what they need. Okay, so trick number 3, we don't call it gathering high-level requirements, okay? Because if the stakeholders hear about that, they're going to want to be there, all right? The trick is to call it requirements planning, okay? We don't want requirements, we want to plan requirements. Okay, so let's look at an example of planning requirements. We're really doing high-level requirements, but we haven't told anybody that that's what we're doing in secret. Okay, so we'll use our TRIPS RU example. Okay, here's our context diagram. The subject matter expert resources, we need 3. Our first one is someone who understands self-service customers. So we don't want to bring the self-service customers in and say, hey, what do you need? We want a subject matter expert. And what we're starting with is what's in scope is making a booking. So we find one of these, and the case study talks about they actually hired somebody since they didn't do that internally. So we have one of these, and we're talking to them. We're discussing things with them, however we're eliciting. And they say, yep, understand that. But actually, part of making a booking before you do that is you need to be able to search for flights. There's a business activity where you're just searching. So think of this like shopping, okay? And by the way, they said you don't have to be a customer to shop. Any internet user can search for flights, and that's exactly right. If you look for flights on any of the websites today, you don't have to be a customer. So this is good information we're getting from our subject matter expert in this area. So they've identified a second business activity, all right? Now, they said, for sure, at the time you make a booking, we actually need we need them to register. Okay, so there will be a business activity to maintain customer details. So initially, the internet user will create themselves, and then once they're a user, they'll maintain their information. So there's another business activity that's in scope we need. Okay, and then they tell us, okay, we've made the booking, we've given them the money. Now they need to show up at the airport and get on a flight. So what they need is a printed copy of their booking information. So that's another activity, is actually creating a hard copy that they can take away with them. So we're getting all this from that. And the fifth activity they've told us about is, hey, they've made this booking, they've given us all their money, but they need to have a way to cancel that booking. So most of your web-based booking systems say, yes, book through us, and if you change your mind in the next 24 hours, no problem, just come online again, cancel your booking, full refund. So our subject matter expert has given us 4 additional activities, all good stuff, and needs to be in scope. Okay, so it's time to find someone who understands the global distribution system and what their relationship is, what activities they support. So they say, oh, we have one of those. They said, you know, before you search for flights, the system needs a lot of reference data. When you search for a flight, you have to say, what airport do you want to fly from, or what city do you want to fly from? When we show you those flights, we want to tell you what airlines they are. And it turns out that the global distribution system has all that reference data, and they're willing to supply it. So we need to be able to capture that, have it in the system available to support these other activities. Then they say, okay, when they're searching for flights and they push the search button, those flights come from the GDS. So we need an activity that imports those. Okay, so we've added that. And turns out that what they get from the GDS are the raw, this is all the scheduled flights. You don't want to show users every scheduled flight because one of them may be fully booked. So we need the system to be able to just filter those in a way that we only show them the appropriate ones. And by the way, we'll show you how much those are going to cost. That's part of what this is going to do for us. And lastly, the idea, once you do make a booking, that needs to be communicated back out through the GDS off to the airlines. And if the booking is canceled again, that needs to go out through the GDS to the airlines. Okay, so we're in our planning session. This is trick number 3. We haven't called it requirements gathering, but we're talking to our subject matter experts. We're seeing our original project scope identify additional business activities that our system users need to interact with. Okay, there's one third user we haven't talked to yet. This is our financial system. Okay, we talk to someone from finance. These are the best people to talk to. They know their system in and out. You can get this activity in about 5 minutes from this person. They say, look, whatever you sell, anything that involves money, you need to post to our financial system. We have an existing interface. You just need to produce a file, send it to us. You'll be happy, we'll be happy. So that subject matter expert gave us an additional capability for our system that's in scope, and that's to produce that file and send it off to them. Okay, so what I've shown you here are the activities in scope for our project. So what we've done is refine the scope. We started with that original one. We've talked to our subject matter experts. They said, look, if you want to do web-based flight bookings, you need to be able to support these activities, these kinds of people, and interface with these kinds of systems. What I haven't shown you yet is an actual high-level requirement. All right, let's look at an example of what I call a capability level, high-level requirement. And let's pretend our project is one of those agile waterfall hybrids. So they want to be agile-like. So they're going to put their high-level requirement in a user story format. Okay, so we'll take this activity, that search for flights one that we added. So as a user story, how that would read is, as an internet user or self-service customer, I want to be able to search for flights so that I can book a trip. So a user story's it's a 1-sentence thing. It's got standard format, as I want, and so that. So as the person receiving the value, the user, internet user, self-service customer, what do they want? They want to be able to search for flights. That's what our little bubble was telling us. And the value, why do they want it? So that they can book a trip. So story-specific value. So that's a high-level, capability-level requirement written in user story format. Okay, if you're a traditional waterfall person and don't want to do user stories, a high-level requirement would be in shall statement format. So that same capability would look like this. An internet user or self-service customer shall be able to search for flights for a trip. Okay, so what we have, the high-level requirement mentions the user roles, the actors, if we're using UML. It mentions the in-scope capability. So that bubble that said you want to search for flights, that's what's been mentioned here. What about value? We didn't mention the value. Okay, the reason is we're in a project, okay? We don't have to specify the value at the requirement level because we have a value of the overall project. It's got a budget, that sort of thing. So any activity that's in scope is supporting that value. Okay, so that's why we don't need it necessarily. Agile needs it normally because they're juggling their product backlog and they want the things of most value, the little bits and pieces they're doing to bubble up to the top. So that's why pure Agile, that value is actually very useful. But in Agile waterfall and straight waterfall, not really that helpful. Okay, another aspect of a user story, what they say is the reason a user story can be one sentence and not go into detail is it's the start of a conversation. That's their mantra. The user story is one sentence, it's a start of a conversation. And presumably the detail is going to come later. It's story refinement time. So this one sentence can sit in the backlog for months. Don't worry about the detail. We'll worry about it on an as-needed basis. Okay, from a shall statement performance, I like the use case, the user story thing, but rather than starting the conversation, we don't want to start the conversation. We want it to be a topic to be discussed. So here we are planning our project. We want to discuss this topic later, and that's going to be during detailed requirements. So that's our objective, is to not have any detail. Where anyone wants to bring us some detail, we're going to discuss that later. Thank you very much. Our shall statement is just going to reference the business activity. Okay, now the user story is at some level, and again with Agile, they level in any way they want. If there's too much detail in it, they split their stories. That's how they operate. But they have the concept of a feature, which is sort of a higher level user story. And if you have a really high level user story, they call that an epic. So they have a way to sort of level user stories. They call them by these more general names. Business activities are at the capability level. That's a business activity. What I talk about in some of the articles I've written is from a business perspective, an information system, we have levels also. A function level breaking down into a process level, which breaks down finally into our activity levels, those what we're supporting. And when I talk about that, I have a generic business model that works for any organization. You're not supposed to be able to read this. If you look at some of the articles I've written, one of them in particular talks about this model of functions. These are all functions here that break down into processes. So I'll give you a quick example. Human resources function, a process within human resources is recruitment. Okay, so you would see a workflow for recruiting. That workflow, the boxes in the workflow are activities. Okay, the steps that you take to do that business process. So one or more of those steps may be included within the scope for an information system. So that's how the activities we have work. But from a requirements perspective, we really are operating at the activity level. Okay, so I've shown you one example, the capability type, that was a user interface, the search for flights. So here it was, we talked about it a minute ago. I'm going to show you an example of each of the other capability types, and we have them in the case study. So remember I said they wanted, after they've done their booking, they want something in hand to be able to take with them to the airport. So that's an example of a report capability. And so we have the bubble, we have the activity, and the activity is actually producing the report, okay? If the system didn't produce the report, you'd have to reproduce it manually. So that's why producing the report is actually automating a manual business activity. It's in scope to produce that report. And what that high-level requirement reads as is a self-service customer shall be able to print their booking confirmation details. All right, that is a topic to be discussed later. Okay, and we'll talk about that in actually the second webinar of the series, those details. We have an example of a data import. Okay, we said as part of searching for flights, we want to get all of those scheduled options from the GDS. So as a high-level requirement that says the GDS shall be able to shall be the source of scheduled options for the trip. Okay, that's in text, represents that bubble. We could have done this as a user story if we wanted to. Data export, remember our financial people, they want to file. The financial system, that's our involved user, shall be provided details related to customer self-service flight bookings and cancellations. So what those details are, that's a topic to be discussed later. And I mentioned that the system needs to do something itself. So we have an example of an automated function. The system shall be able to identify the viable journey options based on the search parameters, what's the customer looking for, and the trip and the options they have to deal with. So here are 5 high-level requirements examples, one of each of the 5 capability types. Okay, so those are the examples I have. That's the textual requirement. So along with the text, there are a few properties from high-level requirements. So we'll talk about those on this slide. So if we documented those textual requirements using a spreadsheet rather than a document, here's an example of a spreadsheet. The text is here, and here are the other properties. So let's look at those one by one. We always say any requirement should have a unique ID. That's this column here. So yes, we want that to be assigned. Because we're using these capability types, it's nice to specify what they are. Because we have a spreadsheet, we could filter all of our requirements, see what reports we have, see what inputs we have, that sort of thing. So that's a property of a high-level requirement. I like to label requirements. So we have the text, but if that bubble, remember the bubble? That's really a convenient label. So if you're looking for a requirement, you don't necessarily have to read all of the text of all the requirements to find what you want. The label's a nice clue. There's our text. It can be a formal shall statement. It can be a user story. Okay, requirements are all supposed to have priorities, Moscow, whatever. So they can be assigned. Complexity, that's a useful thing to have. We'll talk about that later. But from a high-level perspective, for any capability, you'd either say low complexity, medium, or high. Simple report, a medium complexity report, a complex report. Same with the user interface. You can do that. The user roles, now we've mentioned those in the text. We've said the internet user, but if you mention those explicitly as a property, again, you can filter. So that's just a usability thing. When you're managing your requirements, you can show all of the requirements for the GDS, all for wherever your different user roles are. It's nice to record the source of the requirement, which subject matter expert gave you that detail. So if you have questions, Or when it comes to detailed requirements, that's the person who's going to say, hey, we had this topic, can we talk about this more? Okay, and what's also useful is to know who the owner in that area is of that requirement, because they're going to want to be involved in the sign off. All right, so those are the properties of high-level requirements. So we've got the content down nicely, and these are some things we wrap around it. So we've done this we've given you an example of walking through a scoped project, planning high-level requirements with 3 stakeholders. Let's see what the results of that are. Okay, so the results of spending some time with those 3 subject matter experts, we ended up with now 10 actual requirements, 4 user interfaces, these bubbles here, one report, 3 data imports, 1 data export, 1 automated function. And we have that spreadsheet now, or however, wherever you stored those. This is actually the refined scope for the project. This is how we manage the project going forward. All 10 of these activities are in scope. We have high-level requirements. As long as their priority is high enough to keep them in scope, we need to deliver these. If we miss something and we need to add an 11th thing, okay, well, that's a change of scope. We missed that. We put that in scope. We find something we don't need as much as we thought. We can do it manually, take it out of scope. What we have done is we're in this project, a waterfall project or a hybrid project, we're managing our requirements, high-level projects. Okay, so I've shown you what I consider to be good examples of high-level projects. Let's talk about a couple requirements that may or may not be high-level requirements. So I promised you we'd return to this one I showed you at the beginning. Each customer record must be assigned a unique identifier. So like I said, this was in scope as a high-level requirement. Let's see if we can put it in scope here. So here's our web-based flight booking system. Here we are maintaining a customer. We actually have a business activity where we do that. So this requirement is that it has to have a unique identifier. Well, that's something apparently you want the system to do. They've said it's a high-level requirement, it's in scope. The issue with this is this requirement is about one particular field, okay? The customer ID, all right? Here we said maintain customer details. Capability level, the business activity level. The business activity is not producing a customer ID. So this is why we would tend to say, thank you very much. This is not a business activity. We will discuss it later as part of this business activity. Another very popular activity that we see in a lot of requirements is the user shall be able to log on to the system. Well, log on, yeah, that's a user interface. That sounds like a capability type. Do we want one of those? Well, let's try putting it into our system here. Okay, so we're saying, hey, log on is a capability. It's a user interface. I have a high level, I have a statement in the right format. A user shall be able to log on to the system. Is this good or bad? Well, let's look at what we have here. Here is our user, the 3 activities that they need to be logged on when they're making a booking, when they're canceling a booking, where they're requesting that this printout of their booking. Okay, so shouldn't this be in scope? Well, the issue I have with log on is, again, it's really not a business activity. If I were looking at the process of making a booking, looking at a process model with all of the activities within that, as a business process, one of them shouldn't be a box that says log on to the system. If I were testing the system, yes, you'd want someone to log on to the system if that's what was necessary. But I don't want a system level capability to be log on. So I would suggest that this is not a business activity level thing, so therefore it's not included as a high level requirement. Okay, so that leaves us with the 10 high level requirements we've produced. Let's see what we can use those for. Okay, we call that project planning. We can use it for project planning. We now have 10 high-level requirements we need to plan the next phase, which is detail requirements. So the project manager needs to start to plan that. If the project wants to do estimating, estimating is done at the capability level, the user interface, a report, that sort of thing. Remember a few minutes ago I said if you put a sizing on that, low, medium, or high level complexity, that those can support estimating if you want to do that. The other thing capability level high requirements are good for is if you want to evaluate a package, sometimes called COTS, computer off the shelf, that sort of thing. And people ask me, well, do we need detail requirements or just high level requirements? If you have capability level, high level requirements like I've been showing you, that should be sufficient to evaluate packages. Okay, you go out for request for information or an RFP, and the vendors come back and say, yes, we can do that. If we give them that list of capabilities that you're looking for, they do a gap analysis and say, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, without going into the ugly detail. Based on that, you want to shortlist a few, and now you want those shortlisted people to come in and demonstrate the product. This is where you can see some of the detail that the product offers, but you don't want to have your full list of detailed requirements, all the fields you need, before you start to pick packages. So I would recommend using these capability level, high level requirements as package selection requirements. Okay, so we're ready. We've done the examples. We're ready, moving towards wrap up here. Let's revisit those problems we talked about. So lack of guidelines as to what is and isn't high level. What I've presented here are 5 fundamental capability types, and not just the fundamental, but the idea of supporting business activities. So not field level, not below the level of business activity. So those are the guidelines that I've presented today. Lack of good examples. Hopefully those trips are you case study. The ones I've shown you now, they've been published. I'll talk about that in a second as high-level requirements. These good examples are intended to be topics to be discussed. And in the second webinar, we're going to talk about detail requirements. The case study also talks about them. They go to that next level. So hopefully what I've offered you today is a glimpse of that, and we'll be talking about that more next time. Okay, so for takeaway points, I've been rapiding on for a little over 45 minutes. What I want you to remember from all this is that there are 5 capability types. Think about these as a mantra: user interface, report, data import, data export, and automated functions. So 2 days from now, what the heck was Dan talking about? Hopefully you'll have taken those away. Also, that high-level requirements should be sourced from subject matter experts. That's who you really want to get those from. The worst thing that happens when I start a project is someone hands me a set of business requirements, a document that some people have put together and said, here are the requirements, Dan, now have your project deliver that. Those have or haven't been produced by subject matter experts. And the last takeaway point is that sell your high-level requirement solicitation not as requirements gathering, but as planning. So what we don't want your requirements. We want to do some planning. I need to talk to some subject matter experts. Those sessions should take hours, not days, okay, if you keep it at high level. Okay, and I'll just mention the next webinar, as I promised you, we'll discuss this later. The next webinar is titled minimum detail requirements, maximum requirements detail. Okay, and what I mean by that is by minimum detail requirements, I don't want all of that detail in textual requirement statements. So the two objectives for that webinar, one is to demonstrate the level of detail you need. So how much detail? So with high level requirements, we said no detail. Next webinar, we'll say you need all of this detail. And what I'll demonstrate is how you can structure that detail rather than in hundreds of textual statements. Okay, so with that, we are ready for questions. Tracy, over to you. What I've given you here is some contact details, my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn. Apparently there are 4 or 5 Dan Taskers floating around the world. The case study, if you want to find it, it's published on Modern Analyst website. If you search for me in their search capability, it'll bring up some search results, and you'll see these context in requirements in context series. That's where that business model is that's second in that series, and there'll also be links to the case study, which you can download and see all of these requirements. That's me. Tracy.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dan, for that great session. We are going to start the question period. So a reminder, if you have a question, just quickly type them into the questions box. And Dan, I'm going to just take it from the top here. Could you please expand on the AF use case on machine learning perspectives? For example, predictive analytics.
Whoa. Predictive, that is, let's call that a 6th capability, if you want. Predictive analytics, how that works. Those are specialized areas, specialized capabilities that do not come with a native information system. So I'm hemming and hawing here. I have no experience in that area. My experience has been delivering information systems that are really user interface based, reports, all the 5 capabilities I've talked about. So when you're talking about advanced data analytics, things like that, those are specialized areas, really kind of like, where was I going with this? Automated functions that have the neural networks, another specialized area. Those are capabilities on top of that. Even maps in an application, those are delivered by a geographic information system. Okay, that's a whole specialized information system. You can pop those into a screen or even into a report, but those are specialized deliverables. So the answer is I don't have an answer for you in that area.
Thank you. Well, thanks for trying, Dan, for that one. We have many questions, so I'm going to jump into the next one. Can you please recap the explanation of epic versus feature versus user story?
Yes. In the agile world, if you want a finance system, that's an epic. You know, as a CFO, I need a finance system so I can look after my finances. That's an epic. If you need an accounts payable system, okay, as an accounts payable clerk, I need a accounts payable system so I can pay invoices. That's a feature. And now at the activity level, you want to see the activities for payroll or accounts payable, that sort of thing. So those would be feature level and epic level and feature level.
Thanks, Dan. Our next question. I am often asked to provide HLR to assist with effort estimates. What other scenarios can we use HLR for?
Well, the 2 scenarios, one is package selection, as I mentioned, and the second scenario is if you're going to do detailed requirements. These are the topics of conversation, topics of discussion for doing detailed requirements. If you don't have those to do detailed requirements, then you don't know what you're talking. You don't have a focused discussion.
Thanks, Dan. Again, HLL properties. How is the complexity determined, and who is involved in it?
Okay, when you've got a project scope and they say, you've done cost benefit analysis, that is a wet finger in the air. They say, people have implemented this kind of system before and it's cost them $3 million. Once you have your high level requirements and you have those capabilities in scope, now you need really an IT person, okay, someone in the delivery team that says, hey, you produce reports. If it's a simple report, how long does it take you? What do you estimate? If it's a medium report, what do you estimate? So as part of the project manager needs to get someone who is able to estimate the delivery time. And they do that using those rough estimates. And you get what's called a P50, 50% accurate based on low, medium, or high complexity. When you've done your high level or your detail requirements, you can get a P90, which is we're much more confident in how long it's going to take to deliver it. But high level requirements, you get a 50% error rate in your estimates.
Thanks, Dan. Next question, what do you provide to the client or business owner for the HLRs?
What do you provide? Sorry, one more time.
What do you provide to the client or the business owner for the HLRs?
You provide those textual statements. And I like to throw in that diagram because I say, look, as far as we know at this point, this is what needs to be in scope. These are the activities that are going to be supported. These are the actors. Notice we added one as we went. There can be more. And these are the descriptions of what those activities are from a system perspective, what they are. So high-level requirements are signing off those 10, in this case, 10 statements.
Thanks, Dan. I think we may have time for just one or two questions. Let's see. This question, we have a lot of projects that are more API interface related, connecting with third-party vendors with very little user interface changes. Is HLR still applicable, or how can I adopt your HLR model for these types of projects?
That's a very good question. One of the people I used to work for has a system now, and that's all they are is APIs. And they do that day in and day out. So those are the data imports and the data export capabilities. So it depends how they do their business, what their process is for developing new interfaces. If they get something from a user that says, okay, I'm using this protocol now, I'm using this EDI technique, okay, can you support it? And they say, well, yes, we do, then we're done. Or it's a protocol we don't support, so yes, we'll add that. And that's a well-defined protocol. So that's where your focus is. So you either need to do this or you don't. But you start with, hey, I need to import data into your system. Can you support this, yes or no? So that's if the answer is no, then you need to take it further. If the answer is yes, then you don't need to develop anything. You already have a solution.
Thanks, Dan. Let's get in one more question. Can you build a project based on HLR without a SME if the HLR were written down and passed over through an RFI?
Can you deliver it without a subject matter expert? Not in any reasonable time frame or with any confidence. So in the next webinar, we're going to talk about what happens when you don't have a subject matter expert. And the answer is immediate risk to the project, it's going to take longer, or you're going to deliver the wrong thing. So that's today's answer. In the next webinar, we'll get into that further.
Thank you, Dan, for that great informative presentation. That is all the time we have for today. So we would like to thank you for presenting, as well as we'd like to thank everyone for attending today's Modern Analyst webinar. Dan has 2 more webinars coming up, so I have pushed the link through the chat box, and you can also find it on our website. I'd also like to remind everyone that today's webinar, along with the slides, will be archived at the ModernAnalyst.com website within a few business days. This concludes today's event, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.